With so many settings that can ruin your footage, I created a checklist to make sure everything is in order before hitting record. In this video, we'll go through the settings I check before every recording session. This includes selecting a picture profile with the correct base ISO, setting exposure, and making sure to disable certain frustrating features that can degrade footage quality. And you can get my checklist for free, just check the link in the description. Let's start with the picture profile. For the Sony ZV-E1, the base ISO for S-Log3 are 640 and 12,800. But let's be real, I mostly use S-Cinetone. It has a cinematic look baked in and is much easier to work with. The base ISOs for S-Cinetone are 100 and 2000. Next, frame rate. I rarely change mine because I switch to S&Q mode whenever I want slow motion. But it's good to double check. In Europe, I use the PAL system, so my frame rates are 25, 50 and 100. To get 120 frames per second, which is one of the selling points of this camera, I'd had to switch to NTSC, which is a hassle. The 180-degree rule states that for natural motion blur, your shutter speed should be twice your frame rate. So, if you're shooting at 24 or 25 frames per second, that is 150. I wish there were a way to automatically apply the 180-degree shutter rule. It's so easy to accidentally change the shutter speed. It happens to me all the time. I adjust aperture using the rings on my lenses, and I often shoot wide open because why buy premium glass otherwise? For exposure, check ZBrush, multimetering, false color, or whatever tool you prefer. I usually rely on touch tracking to select my focus point, but if there are objects that may throw off the autofocus, I switch to manual. Luckily, all my lenses have a manual focus switch. There are a couple of items that are not on the checklist but are easy to spot on the touch menu. Product showcase mode should be disabled unless you're displaying a product, otherwise it can distract the autofocus. For white balance, avoid auto mode. It produces inconsistent results. You want to manually select a setting or number that matches the result you're looking for. Lighting. I place it in the center of the checklist because it's such an essential part of most of my videos. But I check the light levels at the beginning together with exposure. If I'm using battery-powered lights, I turn them back on right before shooting. Now, let's move on to 3 settings that can really affect your image quality, even ruin your footage. First, steady shot. Dynamic stabilization is great for vlogging. It almost replaces a gimbal, but it crops the image, reducing quality. So when using a tripod, steady shot should always be turned off. This setting does not appear in the touch screen, so you'll need to dig into the menus. Next comes CineVlog, probably the most ridiculous setting ever. It adds black bars to your footage to make it look cinematic, but these bars are baked into the image. I once accidentally enabled CineVlog in London and it ruined half my footage. I wish I could remove CineVlog from the touch panel altogether. Another frustrating feature of the Sony ZV-E1 is the zoom lever. If you use prime lenses, this is a digital zoom, meaning loss of quality. This has ruined shots for me more times than I can count. That's why checking the zoom is now part of my checklist. I've seen 3D printed lever guards for other cameras, but I'm not sure they are compatible with the ZV-E1. Let me know in the comments if you have any insights about this. Now, for accessories. 4 essentials to check before recording. First, storage. Always check there is space on your SD card. And before heading out, double check that there is even a card in the camera. I carry spare SD cards in my backpack, but none of them are the expensive V90 cards required for slow motions, among other things. Next, ND filters. If I'm shooting indoors, they are usually unnecessary, so I make sure they are at the minimum power to avoid messing setting up my exposure settings. Time to check the audio. I make sure my DJI Mic 2 is working. Both the transmitter and the receivers are on and linked, and my lav mic is properly attached. I check sound levels and press the internal recording button. It saved me more than once. The Sony ZV-E1 overheats over longer recording sessions. If you're using an external fan, now is the time to turn it on. And finally, if you need behind-the-scenes footage for B-roll or for your social media, this is a good reminder to grab a quick shot with a second camera or even your phone. I put this checklist together for you. Download it, print it, and keep it in your camera bag. Or, if you print it in self-adhesive paper, stick it on the back of your camera for easy access. If you want to take things a step farther, check out this video where I go over the external fan that I chose for my Sony ZV-E1 and how I use false color to determine exposure.